name is Haley, and I'm a member of the Edmodo support team. For the past 5 years, I taught math to mild to moderate special education students in San Francisco and San Jose. I love educators and can't wait to present the Teachers Lounge webinar series to you. A few housekeeping items before we begin. This webinar will last approximately 30 minutes with time at the end for Q&A. If you have a question for Nira or for Edmodo support, please type it in the chat box. I'll be collecting these questions and we can ask Nira them at the end. To type in your chat window, hover over the green bar at the top of your screen and click on the chat box. Again, I know I've mentioned this, but this presentation is being recorded and it will be available in our Help Center within 48 hours. You will receive an email with a link to a recording at the end of the week as well. Now for today's presentation. You've waited long enough. Nira Dale is a 9th grade honors English and journalism teacher from Florence, Alabama. I'm happy to introduce Nira Dale to her presentation, Meeting the Standards with Edmodo. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm just changing over to Nira.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for your patience. We are such teachers. We're flexible and we're troubleshooters, and so now we get to get started. And again, I'm Nira Dale. I'm so happy that you all came for the second edition of Edmodo's Teachers Lounge webinar series. And I want everybody to be comfortable, and I know Haley's wondering, where did that come from? But a teacher's lounge is not a teacher's lounge without a cup of coffee. And so everyone, we will try our very best to go through this in a timely fashion without taking much more of your time. I am from Alabama and United States, and this is a little snapshot of the beautiful city of Florence, Alabama, where I teach. And so we're going to talk about Edmodo in the classroom. I've been in the classroom for about 5 school years, and 3 of the 5 school years that I've been teaching high school English, I have used Edmodo. And Edmodo has truly afforded me the opportunity to create a very blended classroom learning environment. I feel that Edmodo is the best tool to use when you're trying to blend your classroom. And for those of us who aren't really sure what a blended classroom is, it's basically when students receive face-to-face instruction and they participate in instructional activities inside of the classroom. And the teacher also supplements or complements that instruction with digital platforms outside of the classroom. And it can be during class and sometimes outside of class, just depending on the pace of the teacher. And again, Edmodo is the best tool, in my opinion, that can be used when you're trying to achieve this type of learning environment. And I truly believe that blended learning is one of the best teaching models, no offense to traditional teachers, nor to those who are totally flippers or flip classroom teachers. But blending really helps you to be able to accomplish that versatility needed for 21st century learners and for the time-tested strategies that may or may not be the flashiest, but they are the most effective. And so this is just one of my quotes basically about blended instruction. I've just learned that there's so many differences between our students, and their needs change from year to year, from period to period. So I feel like our jobs, and I know most of us will agree, as teachers, we just need to find the best model for that strategy or for that lesson that we need to accomplish whatever curriculum standards we're trying to meet. And so I try not to force one particular teaching model, but it's whatever works best for you and for your students. And so again, Edmodo is the best all-around tool to do this seamlessly. And as I mentioned before, there are so many ways to utilize Edmodo in this way. However, tonight I'm only going to highlight 3 of what I consider to be the most useful strategies for using Edmodo in your classroom. And I would like to hear from you. Please post a comment if you will. If you would set the goal perhaps to adapt at least one of these strategies to your teaching style in your classroom. And I would love to hear perhaps how this worked for you. Maybe you stepped it up a notch or added something to, because it's for not just, I teach English language, so you're going to see a lot of English language arts lessons, but this would apply across the content. So I hope to hear from you. And of course, I want to hear suggestions. Perhaps you have suggestions that would improve the strategies that you see today. So again, I'm just going to focus on 3. And what I consider to be the most practical and most useful strategies for blending with Edmodo in your classroom. The first one, and this is really going to take on the meat of this presentation, is formative assessment. I truly believe that when we do formative assessments in our classrooms and we're intentional, the more successful our students will be. And the second thing we're going to discuss is assessing learning and engaging learning through the back channel. And so if you're not sure what the back channel is, just hang out for a moment and I'll help you with that. And finally, we're going to discuss peer publishing and peer teaching, the benefits of that. And you'll see, you'll be so surprised at how much the effort will increase and the motivation will increase when you are allowing your students to publish and peer teach, when their audience is not just their little old English teacher. So those are some things we're going to discuss. So we're going to start first with formative assessments. And again, just to clarify, if we're not sure what it means to assess formatively, that just simply means that you're constantly monitoring student learning to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by the teachers to improve student learning. Students identify their strengths and weaknesses when you do this. Teachers recognize where their students are struggling, and they can address those problems immediately as opposed to at the end of a course of study. And these are typically low stakes, small point value assessments. And so when we become Edmodo users, most of us, myself included, we jump right into the Edmodo quiz option because it does provide that instant, easy grading, paperless benefit that we as teachers need. And it's really nice to see those pie charts to get a snapshot of how our classes are performing as a whole. But one thing about being able to assess formatively is, and I learned this through EdmodoCon 2013 with Sibley Johnson's presentation, she really stressed how we can become more intentional in our use of the Edmodo quiz application and how we can use Edmodo for assessing learning in class. And so I took a little stint of it in the first 9 weeks of my instruction. And basically the process is a little more than just creating the Edmodo quizzes and tests as an alternative to paper quizzes and tests. Again, we have a lot of benefits there. But if we really intentionally design questions within our assessments in Edmodo that require students to use specific thinking processes that are reflective of the specific content standards, even if it's just one or maybe a few questions, a mini quiz given as a bell ringer or an exit slip. This is just so important. And for those of us here in the United States under the new Common Core, we know that if you see there on the left, we really have to be very, very specific about the thought processes that requires students to be able to achieve the standards. And so many of us, even those of us who went to great universities and colleges, we thought this way. We did this in college, but most of us weren't taught how to teach students how to think this way. So the Edmodo doing this formatively, using these types of quizzes, really helps students practice this thinking. So if you see on the right, these are the I can statements, and I know many teachers use these. When students can say this, I can identify, or I can evaluate, or I can master these standards, or basically what you're seeing. If students can reach mastery, they can be able to say these confidently. And so here you can see on the left, these are the question stems that address specific standards for my classroom. And any content, you are able to do that. Students should be able to answer certain questions that show mastery. And on the right side, you can see snapshots of specific Edmodo quiz questions that I've created that address those stems. And so when you do this, you're able to see a snapshot. When you see that pie chart, you're not just saying, oh, this many students missed this question. You're seeing this percentage of my students have not mastered this specific question stem. So for instance, you have, what is the purpose of lines? And you see that there. What was the purpose the author's purpose in writing this text. And they were all applicable to different passages, but they're still doing the same thinking. What technique is used in the following line that addresses a specific ACT quality core, which is in harmony with the Common Core standard. So those are the types of ways that we can be more intentional in how we create our assessments. Here's another way I wanted you to see. Sometimes we have to do oftentimes we have to do things on the fly as teachers because we're oftentimes in time crunches no matter how much we try to plan. This shows that you may or may not have time to type an entire question, and some of you may already do this, but you may not be able to type an entire question or type questions in multiple choice answers. You can use what you already have on paper, whether it's a textbook, whether it's a handout or worksheet, and make sure, though, when you create your quiz online, that you title that quiz or you title that test and put the question A, B, or C and set the correct answer. And the reason why it's important that you title that quiz, because students use these, when you use it formatively, my students, they use this as a study tool, so you want them to be able to refer back to the right handout or page number in the textbook. But again, if you know these are tied to standards, your students are able to know exactly where they are. And for those of us who may not, and I used to years ago, or a couple of years ago, I should say, I used to think, like many of us, that multiple choice is not really high-level thinking. But I learned that by making my students not only choose which multiple choice item is the correct answer, they also have to write an explanation in their do now or their bell ringer section of their binder as to why they think that's the correct answer. But again, it's conditioning and allowing them to practice the thought processes that's required for them to meet certain standards. So this allows us to be much more intentional in assessing our students' learning. So when you go about Edmodo quizzes in this fashion, the pie charts, again, they don't just tell you how many questions were missed. They tell you how many standards are maybe not, or how many standards are not taught well or that were not mastered. As you see here, I have a question where 100% of my students missed that question. So I have to go back to the drawing board. My end goal is not to simply, as I put here, know that I taught it. You know, how many times? I want to make sure I teach that. But the goal is that they learned it. And so when we really constantly throughout the entire unit, you know, as we teach, we ask, you know, where they are, we see where they are. That's how we can feel confident that, you know, our conscience can say, I really took time to cover this material, and I want to make sure that I take time to make sure that they learned it. And so here is a snapshot again of going back, and this is kind of like a post-assessment. When I give tests and they get their grades, I don't just give them their grades and say, you know, you've got it. This is the grade you earned. We're moving on. We have to reconsider, revisit, reteach the standards that they're not getting. This picture was actually taken by one of the technology specialists in our region, and I found this on his Facebook page yesterday or the day before yesterday, so I added this. But he dropped in my classroom, and he was trying to share something else with me, but he just sat back, and he was saying that basically he says, Ms. Dale not only informs her students of their correct, incorrect responses, but helps them to analyze question stems, foils, rationale for their response. So they have to not just see that they missed a question, but they have to write what they realized they did wrong to get that question wrong, and hopefully they'll realize not to do that again. So these are just different ways, and it may seem like overkill, but it really, I've seen it work. Here is a snapshot of the end of, this is a summative assessment, which is a bit more high stakes than, of course, your formative assessment. This is at the end of a quarter. And what you see here are pie charts of the standard analyses for what we taught in the first 9 weeks on the left side, and then the second 9 weeks on the right. And again, these are just the standards. You can't see the actual standards. And of course, in any school year, your students need to be getting better. So hopefully that's going to happen anyway. But I must say that I know that in the first 9 weeks, in the first 9 weeks of the first quarter, I was not as intentional about, using what my students call the boot camp quizzes, the Edmodo quizzes. I would do it maybe towards the end of a unit still, right? Like the week of the test and the week of the bigger summative assessments. And those who performed really well, I asked them, what helped you so that you could perform well in that first quarter? And most of them said it was the quizzes, the mini quizzes that we did in the last few weeks before we took the test. So in the second quarter, my whole quarter, everything that I taught was about making sure that they were able to see their learning, because that's what they said. I could see where I was. I realized I didn't really know this. I thought I knew this. And then when I didn't get a good quiz grade, I was going back to the drawing board. So this is really good for students. We're not surprising them when they have. And here are my students' comments. This was after the second quarter. I sent out a poll to all of the students that had performed really high. And let me just make sure I tell you this. On the left side, the standards percentage of mastery was 38% to 86% in that first 9 weeks. And by the second 9 weeks, that level of mastery went from 70% to 100%. I actually had about 3 students I teach about 105 students total. So I had about 3 that actually had a 100%. And these were basically the same standards. I think there were 5 standards covered in this quarter that were not covered here, and likewise. So these were basically the same standards that were covered in the first quarter. This was short story focused, and in the second quarter we did more poetry. So thinking processes, though, they were pretty much the same. And so here is a snapshot of what the students said. I sent out over the Christmas break, or right before they got out for the break, I asked the ones who scored highest, what helped you the most? And you can't see all of their replies, but they were pretty much the same. The boot camp quizzes definitely helped me. Having the same types of questions, helped me see my progress and what I needed to work on. Boot camp quiz. This person here said the thing that helped me the most was definitely the boot camp quizzes. And notice he says quick, stress-free checkups on your progress. Again, Edmodo quizzes, and they call them boot camp quizzes because you can't just pick A, B, C, or D. They know they're going to have to write out their rationale. Why did I choose this answer? This is the textual evidence that supports this answer. So it's higher. They know they're going to have to think much more deeply than a typical, bell ringer journal entry, which is good for them to write. And sometimes I have them respond to the reading. But the boot camp quizzes, they know we're working hard. And as you see here, they learn to appreciate those. And this is actually my favorite form of formative assessment. Now, I love my Edmodo quizzes. I depend on the data from those quizzes. But one thing about the pie charts in Edmodo, they don't tell you why your students got this question right, or why this percentage of your students missed this question. So when you need to have formative assessments, of course, that will allow students to truly articulate their learning or why they're not learning in writing. And you would be so surprised how honest they are. So if you just think back to the last time that you said, do you understand? Or how many people, don't understand? I assure you, if you gave them the opportunity to write down whether or not they understood, you will probably get an entirely different response. And I learned that all the time. And so here you'll see what I do here is I put a sticky note on everyone's desk in the last 5 minutes of class. And I tell them, we call it brain traffic. And what were your aha moments? What connections did you make? I'm still unclear about. That's the yellow light. And of course, I've stolen this from the elementary teachers. They usually do this red light, green light. And so we call it brain traffic. That's the high school take on it. And so what are you still unclear about? They have to explain why. It's not just I don't understand. They have to tell me what exactly do you not understand and why, And then your learning stopped when. And so they really do, as they leave, that's the exit slip. They post their exit slip on the door, on their way out the door. And then I'll go back, as you see here, and organize those by standards. There we are again. If you could see how I categorize those post-it notes, they're all by standards. I can see them. The majority of them don't understand this, and that's probably parallelism. They had a hard time with that. And so that's the in-class, paper on paper, not digital, but it is very effective, especially when you really just want to see where they're thinking is. But I do that same strategy in Edmodo. And what I do is you can do this one of two ways. When you give them more time, because I gave them about 10 minutes sometimes, or this can be a homework assignment. But I want them to respond to all three of the sections. Give me your aha moments, give me all of your unclear about moments, and tell me when your learning stops. And so I want them to respond in all three of the regions. Usually they're just going to pick one. Sometimes they pick more than one, but usually they just do one when they're writing it on the sticky note. But here, this gives them opportunity to give me more information if they need to. And you will be so surprised, again, the candor of your students. And so here I have my student. I'm trying to give you a snapshot of some of their responses. My aha moment was when you explained central idea. I'm still unclear about the question stem. Which lines, if deleted? I got to tell you about this question stem really quickly. Which lines, if deleted, would change which would have the least effect. That was it. Which lines, if deleted, would have the least effect to the overall meaning of the passage? English teachers, do you remember me posting that in the communities? Everybody was, I'm not sure how, that really, even adults, sometimes we have to think about the question. Again, this shows they need to really practice those thought processes before they can even dig into the actual standard. But here I responded right there to this student. They're looking for what's most important. And down at the bottom, this student is telling us again about a specific poem, and I tell her to look at the last line of the poem. So you're able to give instant feedback. But I really wanted to highlight this student, very smart student. She tells us her aha moment, and she's unclear about central idea. But like I said, the honesty, this person would never say this in class, but they pour their heart out on a sticky note or in Edmodo when you give them that opportunity to really articulate. And she says, my learning stopped when you go over and over and over again, when you go over things over and again. And she said, if you could set up stations where the students could kind of teach each other, that would be great, because half the class doesn't understand something, but the other class or the other half gets it. So I'm just sitting there listening to parallelism when I really need help with central idea. And of course, and then she's nice. She says at the bottom, on the side note, you're doing a good job at teaching me concepts, because I'm usually really bad at making inferences and drawing conclusions. But this year I feel like I'm starting to get it. So again, and she, but I've had some that won't try to give you a nice compliment at the end. They just tell you, and you need to know that. We need to know that as teachers, why they're not getting it. This is an example of doing a formative assessment through gamifying your classroom, and it's really much more. And Mr. Brian Lewis is the next Edmodo webinar, teachers webinar. Teachers Lounge webinar, he's going to talk about gamifying your classroom. But here it's just a snapshot of my students. They're split up into teams. And basically, if you're on 5th period Harvard, you're in the same team with 8th period Harvard. They take a mini quiz at the end of the week that were the highest score, the highest average will get bonus points on the big test. And so you see them cheering each other on. Go Harvard, squad up. I'm not sure what that means. And come on Yale. And they really do. They compete. And again, using Edmodo quizzes, I send it to their groups. You notice I have all classes here at the beginning of the year. They join my class, and they also join whichever team they're assigned. So they have 2 groups that they join, and that way I can send the same quiz to multiple groups. They're all taking the same quiz, but I get to get that data. I get to get it grouped by their teams, and I can see the averages and give them their bonus points, and they look forward to that. So now we finally made it to the back channel, and hopefully you didn't mind. We spent a lot of time on formative assessment, because I truly, again, believe that is what should really be the main compass for our learning, or for our teaching, keeping the pulse on the learning of our students. But the back channel is such a useful tool, strategy that we can use in the classroom. What I do, basically, let me make sure everyone understands, back channeling is when you use network computer devices to maintain a real-time online conversation alongside live spoken remarks. And so that's the definitive version of what the back channel is. If you really want to experience it, you should attend an EdmodoCon event because that's where I was introduced to the back channel. I was thinking, why does the speaker keep saying in the back channel? But I learned that this is an amazing way to get all of my students involved in the lesson, even the ones who are shy. So what I basically have is I have students that are always wanting to answer. I know we all have those. But then you have those shyer students who don't express themselves as quickly, or they're not as verbal as those students who are always raising their hands or always answering questions. And I do a lot of Socratic circles or just literature discussions. And so I need my students to all be able to give me their feedback. And so students, when they use the back channel, that allows for students to do that, whether or not you are outspoken or whether you're the shy student. And so there are different ways that you can do this. The basic way that I do it is I have premeditated questions, and I may post them at the beginning of class or before class for each period. So here I ask them to use text support to compare and contrast two different poets, right? And I love using visuals. And so what I do is I allow them to, at the same time, answer this question in the back channel. No one can answer any question. No one can say anything about the question until we meet back together in the classroom. But right now I want you going through the back door, through the back channel. And so you can see the students, they are expressing their personal thoughts from the reading of those poems. And here they're comparing Langston Hughes and Walt Whitman. Another way to use the back channel is to basically allow them to initiate the discussion. I do this strategy in the classroom, and a lot of these strategies I learned from teachingchannel.org. But what I do is I pass this jar around, and I give everybody 2 pennies, literally 2 pennies, and they have to give their 2 cents from the reading that we did the night before. And so they drop each penny in the bucket as they contribute to the discussion, and the bucket goes around the whole room. And they just, ninth graders, they get excited about dropping a penny in the jar, and it's, believe it or not, they have their 2 cents ready. But we also use the back channel for them to give their 2 cents. And again, simultaneously, you don't have to wait for the bucket to go around. Everybody enters their 2 cents online, and then after the time allotted for them to do that, we go back and we go through those different posts, and I'm reading as they're posting. Of course, if I give them 8 minutes or 7 minutes to respond to the reading in the back channel, I'm reading their posts as they post them. And so I know which ones I really want to highlight in class. But we try our best to go through all of those in the back channel, all of those who, of course, I'm going to focus on those who usually don't say much, but they are really good about expressing themselves. If you read if you can see some of the posts here, they are really good about expressing. They find symbolism and different things that we've talked about in class, and they are more readily they're ready to discuss these in the back channel online. Kids they're digital. A lot of them are digital natives. They text and they're on their social media, and they will type something and express themselves through digital media before they will raise their hand and say it in class. I've seen it over and over and over and over again. And so that is the back channel. So 2 great reasons to use the back channel is basically 100% class participation. That's one for sure thing. You've got everyone's contribution. They can use it themselves as a reference to study for the test as they look at the things that they've posted and what their peers have posted. And also you can use their responses to guide the class discussion. To me, it's very invaluable tool. And so that's the back channel. And now we've come to our final portion of the teacher's webinar. We're going to talk very briefly about the benefits of peer publishing and peer teaching. And so the one thing I love about Edmodo is the safe environment that it allows for students and teachers to do this. So just by definition, peer publishing is when students publish demonstrations of their learning within the classroom. They allow their work to be viewed and evaluated by their classmates. And so again, this is you'll be so surprised at how the motivation increases when their audience is not just you, the teacher. The outcome is not just the red circle, the red letter grade on the paper. They realize that they are going to be, of course you can't do this with everything, but when you're conceptual learning, and even just basic demonstrations of learning. And Edmodo has so many ways for students to publish online, and for them to be able to do this in a safe environment, that's the best thing. So you can have them, and it's exclusive to your students. Unless you're collaborating with another classroom, it's still you're able to monitor that communication. And so any type of media can be embedded in posts in Edmodo. So students have so many options for projects, for demonstrations of their learning in multiple formats. Here you can see on the left many quizzes. My students, we're one-to-one with iPads. So our students use a lot of iPad applications. And this is Educreation. So they're able to take a literature piece, annotate it, visually, and then they have to commentate it. So they have to actually teach, and I call them 30-second lessons, or sometimes the 60-second lessons, and then they have to publish their lessons in my all honors group. That means all of my students get to see it, but because some things they only publish just to their class periods, but sometimes I want them all periods to see each other's work, and they have to make certain type of comments. So it's really, really good. And they themselves have said, when I hear when I watch the lesson cast of my peers, or I watch it over and over again, they are so surprised to see how much more so they understand the concepts, because they've heard it over and over again. And that's really peer tutoring, peer teaching. It's just online instead of in the classroom. So I think it's a wonderful, wonderful strategy. Over here, I'm using this, I'm allowing my students to use this application called Testmos, Web 2.0, Testmos, Testmoz. I should have put it there for you to check it out if you don't know. Oh, it is. It's right there. And yeah, that is a good application because it allows students to create quizzes themselves. They can publish the link to those quizzes for other students to take their quizzes. So again, a form of tutoring. I am a language teacher, so writing and editing is important in my class, but this can work just the same or to some degree in other classrooms, especially history. But I allow my students to blog, and then they have to reply to one another's blogs critically. So you have the writing element and you have the editing. But they show, it shows how they can do this again in a safe environment. And you can see, I really like that. Notice the student says, I really like how you use arguments from the opposing side to support your thesis. Here the student says, good rhetorical questioning in your fourth paragraph. I recommend saying da 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 da. And so I think that's just so good to be able to, for them to give each other feedback. They're giving them criticism, but they're giving them positive feedback. Good use of content pictures, but it's hard to see your point of view. This is really, really good for students to be able to do this for one another. And again, Edmodo allows them to add visual media to these posts. They've written a persuasive piece of writing, but they've added visual media to support their writing. Again, and you see the feedback that they're giving each other there. I love how you had examples of popular books and so forth. A couple of grammatical errors, but they're still giving each other pats on the back. So this is really good. And in this picture, you see a snapshot of my students collaborating with there were actually 3 classrooms, and these teachers were all Edmodo users. You see them getting directives from Mrs. Abina. She is from Malaysia, and she's giving my student, they're just, in awe. And so she's giving them directives for this project. We were collecting authentic samples of language from the different countries. And so this was really good. And it's good that they were able to do this again in a safe classroom environment that Edmodo provides. And they're able to collaborate side by side. They're working on the same assignment, although they're working on that assignment with students on the other side of the world. So that's just something that, other platforms cannot provide. Here, my students were doing a research project. They were with a classroom in India, and this was a while back, but it was so good, and it was such a cultural learning experience for my students, because they were these 9th graders. They were all 9th graders. Mrs. Nigham's class, she's also an Edmodo user, and my students, they were all the same age, but they were so different, and they were so similar. So they were shocked at each other's similarities. But they were researching natural disasters in their countries, in the different countries. You have Katrina over here, and you have tsunami over here, and it was just such a memorable experience. And over here, my students are collaborating with Indonesia, and they're doing a study on courtship for young people. So this was just something that you can't get this opportunity unless we take the time to allow our students to use or blend instruction so that they can use different platforms to be able to motivate themselves and to be able to share their learning. And that's what peer publishing can do for them. And so these are the three main things that I hope you take from this presentation, and hopefully you can adapt them to your classroom. Formative assessments, being intentional and strategic in how we make our quizzes, not just an alternative to the paper, but the test version of our quiz, or the paper version of our tests or quizzes, but to be intentional about tying them to our standards and being able to make decisions to guide our instruction. Also using the back channel, and there we actually have an Edmodo. There's an Edmodo app in the App Store for back channeling. Last I checked, but I haven't used it yet. If you're using that, let me know how that works, because I haven't used that. I've just used it. I use Edmodo. I just take a post and I put those questions that I want them to discuss in class today. I just take a regular Edmodo post and I put visual aids in there that goes with the questions, and we let the students go in through the back door first, and then we come to class and have that discussion. And so that can be used across the content, and then allow students to publish their work. You know, they are more motivated when their audience is not just their little old English teacher. That's what I say about it. So hopefully you've learned something, just one thing at least, from hanging out with me in today's Teacher's Lounge. And if you have questions, comments, or suggestions, I would be so happy to answer them if you go to the Edmodo blog page where you signed up for this webinar.
Great, Nira. Thank you so much. Yeah, so what I'm going to do, thank you so much. And I have to say that people have been talking the entire presentation, and lots and lots of questions for you, but I want to highlight a couple of the questions that kept coming. Nira, can you? Oh, Nira, I, of course, muted myself. Sorry. Thank you so much, Nira, for your presentation. We've been really lucky to have you today, and we're really fortunate to be working with you. I'm just going to switch back to my screen. We have a lot of questions that have come in throughout the course of your presentation, but one area where a lot of teachers had questions was about the back channel. So just one quick little logistical one. A couple teachers were wondering, do you use the back channel in your main group, in your small groups, or do you use it throughout your groups on Edmodo?
I use the back channel in that particular class period. So I have 6 classes. So I have 6 different, I'll send a post. It's just a basic Edmodo post to that class for that day's discussion. And so in the same session, as I mentioned at ModoCon, how everyone just responded, of course, ModoCon was that singular event. So when I put a post in the back channel, which basically that applies to today's lesson for that period, it may have certain images, the students are going to respond to the questions through that post. Sometimes there may be 3 or 4 different posts, depending on how many questions I really want us to focus on in that lesson. And so it's just basically what it is. I don't send it before they come into my class. I send it out right at the beginning, right before the target bell, so they'll know this is where we're going today, so that they don't do it in another class. That's how in high school you have to think about, the timing and so forth. If your students, you don't want them to start on it before they get to your class.
Great, and that actually flowed right into another question someone had about, do you have the students, when you do have the students responding to one another, do you make sure that they first all post and then they read each other's posts and reply? How does that look in your classroom?
What I do is, like, for instance, when we do the blog, when they had the persuasive writing assignment on citizenship, they had to first, that was a bigger writing assignment. They had to first write it, and it had to be kind of approved by me. They had to do a peer edit with someone face-to-face and then get it approved by me. And then they posted it into the big group. So before they finally posted it, then students were prepped on how you respond. I talked to them how you respond in a blog in an academic way. And so the students, once the students post, they knew the deadline to post your blog, then the rest of their peers could go on and they were to give the compliment sandwich. I'm sure a lot of English teachers look for or know the compliment sandwich. You give one compliment, one criticism, and another compliment. And so I hope that answered the question. looking for your individual responses, and so we go from there. But they generally do that simultaneously.
Great, and that actually kind of filled in, and not to answer the question for you, but we had a couple of special education teachers that asked if they thought the back channel could be used in their classroom. And from what I gathered from your presentation, you're saying, yes, the back channel is a great way to engage all students in your classroom.
Yes, absolutely. It allows them, because a lot of your special needs students or students who are special needs, but they're just not as, it's going to take them a little bit longer to, they want to think about, I have some very smart students that just want to think about what they want to say. They're nervous, they're going to say the wrong thing, but you give them that opportunity to articulate themselves in writing. You would be so surprised how much more so you get from them to allow them to write or express themselves through writing or typing in the back channel.
Great, and a couple teachers are just absolutely in love with your resources, everything you were showing. Is there a website or somewhere that teachers can go to see all of your resources?
Edmodo.
So,
yeah, I'm saying I've learned a lot. I'm saying that and being a little facetious. A lot of the resources that I have learned to use, especially over the past 3 years, come from being involved in the teacher communities on Edmodo. The Edmodo teacher communities are invaluable, but I use my, if you go to Dale's Digital Classroom, that's my personal website, and I have, if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, my home page, you'll see a student creation workstation. Because my students, typically, they have to create, as I showed in my presentation, demonstrations of what they learned. Sometimes I say you have to use this application or you need to use this type of Web 2.0 application. But sometimes I will say, use whatever you want to use. Use whatever your team, because they're Harvard, Columbia, Yale, those teams, they do challenges together. Sometimes they have to be creative and do their own thing, and it's kind of a team challenge. But I tell them to use whatever works best for them. And so that website, Student Creation Workstation, you'll see a lot of the Web 2.0 tools that I learned from my colleagues on Edmodo. And so really, it's I'm being facetious, but the Edmodo communities, I would suggest if you would stay in your or even venture out to the other content communities, you'd be surprised how much sometimes you'll get overwhelmed. But that's my suggestion. I've learned more from my fellow Edmodians, like Kate Baker, and I'm having my mind is going bad now. But most of it, of course, Miss Sandy King, all of those very zealous Edmodo users, we always share best practices, and there are hundreds of others. I'm just having a senior moment.
Nira, the questions are continuing to come in, but I want to respect everyone's time. But so many people, just so you know, are absolutely in love with the different activities you have, especially the way that you're changing common things like exit tickets, that you're really making students think about their responses. So a lot of teachers very, very excited to try this idea, all these different ideas that you've presented today. So thank you for presenting on this month's Teachers Lounge, and I have a feeling that you're going to be seeing a lot of connections and a lot of people asking you questions over the next couple of weeks. So be prepared.
Okay, well, please, if they will, in the Edmodo blog page where they sign up for the webinar, especially if you have suggestions or questions, I will be happy to. I will be visiting that page throughout this week. If you have questions, if you're not connected to me, I know most of you are connected to me on Edmodo, so you can send me a message. But I know there are many others that I don't know, and so if you reply in the blog, the Edmodo blog for this webinar, I will be happy to hear your suggestions and your questions and your concerns.
Thank you so much, Nira. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in today, and thank you for your patience as we worked through some issues at the beginning. If anyone that you know was unable to hear this webinar, please share it with them. We will have the recording posted within the next 24 hours, so please share that recording with your colleagues, especially if you heard something that Nira shared that you really liked. Please share that with your colleagues. These are really great best practices for anyone, whether they're an Edmodo user or not an Edmodo user. It's just great best practices. I want to let you know that next month we will be featuring Teachers Lounge with Mr. Bobby Brian Lewis. Mr. Lewis is also an Edmodo support ambassador. He is from Perry, Georgia, and he is going to be talking about a topic that Nira touched on as well, but gamifying your classroom with Edmodo. So we will be setting up that registration within the next 48 hours, and you can register for that event by going to support.edmodo.com and just put in the search bar Teachers Lounge, and you will immediately be directed not only to Nira's recording and Shane's recording from last month, but you will also be able to register for Bobby's presentation in February. Thank you so much for being involved. If you have any questions, please feel free to email support@edmodo.com, and you can always check out the Teachers Lounge page in our Health Center. Thank you so much for attending. I appreciate everyone being here, and thank you so much for your patience. Have a great rest of your day.